Hi, I'm Nate from Magnanimous Media, and I'm going to teach you how to make an XLR cable. For parts, we went with the Nutrix male and female connectors. They are recognized as an industry standard and are universal. The tools that will be needed are a soldering iron, wire stripper, scissors, utility knife, solder, and small electronics clamp. We found all of the tools on Amazon.com, except for the soldering iron, which we found on McMaster-Carr. It is always good to know exactly where your problem persists. You'll want to unscrew the boot from the connector, exposing the inside solder connections. You'll want to make sure that these are all good connections and they're not coming apart. If it's a bad connection, you'll need to cut the wire and then strip off about an inch of the outer insulation, exposing the wire mesh and positive and negative cables. You'll want to take all of your wire mesh and twist it together. This will serve as your ground wire. You'll then want to take off about a 1/4 inch of the inner rubber insulation from the positive and negative wires, exposing the inner core. Prepping the cables is a very important step in the process. This will help to create a solid bond between the connectors and the wires. Using your solder, you'll want to put a small amount on the ground, positive, and negative wires, as well as the 3 points on the connector. When prepping the connectors, make sure not to melt the plastic housing or hold onto the pins when soldering, as it will become very hot. After all of your wires and connectors have been prepped, it is important to put your boot onto your cable. If this is not done so before you solder your connectors to your wires, then you'll have to cut the cable and restart the entire process. Once your boot is on the cable, you can start the process of soldering your wires to your connectors. Each connector has the numbers 1, 2, and 3 next to each of the connection points, and they should be soldered in that order. 1 is the ground, the wire mesh. 2 is the positive, which will be a blue or colored wire, and finally 3 is the negative, which is a white wire. It is extremely important to stay consistent as to where you're soldering your wires to. On some connectors, the male and female connection points will be flipped. Starting out with your ground wire, you'll want to press it into the connection point. This is where your electronics clamp will come in handy to make sure everything stays in place. You'll then want to take a small amount of solder and press the iron and the solder against the wire and connection point. Once the solder has melted, you'll want to make sure to keep the wire and connection point in place. This could be the difference between a good or a bad solder. A good way to tell if you have a strong solder is if the solder point is smooth and shiny. If the solder seems to look a bit dull, the wire could have moved during the drying process, and it might not be as good a connection as it could be. You'll want to continue this process for each of the positive and negative wires, making sure that you're consistent with each of the corresponding numbers. After the wires have been soldered together and they seem to have a solid connection, you'll want to take the connector's housing and slide it over the solder points. Depending on your type of connector, it might be threaded or screwed into place. After you finish your connectors, you'll need to test out your cable. If your signal is clear, then you're all good to go. Thanks for watching, and please check out magnanimous.biz for all your production needs.